Good. Thank you. Just to remind everybody while we're getting started that muting your microphone will help with noise in the background. We're a couple minutes over our start time, so I wanted to go ahead and get started today. We're here to talk about the new abnormal that we're in, and what does that mean? What now? How are we going to react? And it's really leveraging and transitioning from where we are, where we were, to where we are right now, and to where we're going long term over this. I'd like to take just a couple minutes to introduce ourselves. Cole, do you want to go first?
Yeah, my name is Cole Guthrie, and I'm a junior project manager here at Celerity, and I'll be helping facilitate this presentation with Bert.
And my name is Bert Walther. I'm an executive project manager for the Celerity Group and have been working in project management for over 15 years. So this is an exciting moment to be alive. It's really kind of pressing and stretching us in a lot of different ways. Just a little note as we do get started, questions and comments will be taken in the chat area during the presentation. And at the end, there'll be a chance for you to unmute and ask some questions live if you'd like to do that. And Cole will be kind of monitoring all of that, so I'll stop at different times and ask him for any input from the folks that are listening. Very good. So we really do want to get started with the reality that we are someplace completely different than we were at the beginning of March. It was almost an episodic life, if we think about it, probably akin somewhat to The Office. We knew who the caricatures were. We knew what they were doing. We were comfortable with the circumstances. We knew how to avoid certain situations. We knew how to provoke certain situations. But now we are in a place that is new every day, and we are being stretched, and we are being asked to deliver essential responsibilities, to adapt our processes, and to transform the work that we're doing from what we had in an office environment to being dispersed and working remotely with new systems and new tools, and we want to talk through that. Ultimately, though, at the end of all of this, wherever that may be, and this is a variable time that we're in, we're not sure that whether we're going to be here for another week or another 3 months, but at some point it will end. And we will move on then to yet a new normal, because we probably won't go back to where we were. We were working with a couple companies, a couple customers that were evaluating what they were going to do with their headquarters. And because of all of this, they're able to ask questions about, do they need to have headquarters now for their whole group, or could they plan for only having 20% of their people in? This could really have some large financial implications for companies as they do business going forward. There is a black swan. I don't know whether you can tell on the back of this slide, because we are in a black swan moment. Nassim Nicholas Taleb has talked about this in a book. This is akin to probably not a shock to anyone, akin to what happened at 9/11, and we'll be writing about this and evaluating what happened here. But this is the situation where we're in, and at some point we're going to get back to a future that is positive and growth oriented. And I'm really optimistic. Stephen Sinek had a piece that we've been sharing throughout the office, that we're not unrealistic about what the situation that we're in now, but we believe that the future is positive. And so there is that chance for optimism in the midst of this moment. Cole, do you want to talk a little bit about this slide?
Yeah, Bert, I'm still seeing the title slide. Is anybody else seeing the more updated stuff?
Yes, we're seeing the workspaces right now.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's updated now. Yeah, so I'm sure everybody can relate to one of these situations. So people are making do with what they have. I mean, you have somebody in the hallway avoiding kids screaming, dogs barking, wind chimes going in the background. So these are, people having to be resourceful and, trying to adjust to the current environment.
Yeah, I can only imagine that the spin cycle on that washing machine would be a really cool effect on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. I'd be really interested in seeing that in one of our sessions. So for our internal team, if anybody wants to set that up, it could be worth a little bit of a giggle uh, as we go forward. We've got to keep our sense of humor about where we are at and what we're working on. What we've been able to kind of identify in the midst of all of this at Celerity is that there is a series of steps that we're going through. I tend to think of this model more as a speedometer or a tachometer, that there's some variability to it. I think we've all been through the massive part of conquering some dysfunction and beginning to establish some basic work routines and basic work functionality. And we're probably on most days able to deliver essential responsibilities. On a great day, we may even kind of go into the fact that we've been able to evaluate and adapt a process. I doubt if many of us have gotten all the way over to transforming how we operate. But this model gives us a place where we can talk about how this moment is affecting people and processes and tools. What I want to keep in mind, though, and what I've keep telling myself and being kind to myself and the others that I work with, is that just because we are adapting a process, we may uncover the very next moment that we are back at kind of conquering a dysfunction, something that we thought should be working in this environment, but indeed is not working, and that's a huge effort. Now, what we've kind of done is broken this out into uh, a playbook idea. How are we what are our plays when we're trying to conquer dysfunction or to work with basic functionality? Everybody's everybody's situation is similar in this moment, and yet it's completely unique. And one of the things that we have been working with internally and working with some of our customers on are how do we address this, and what are the various tasks, and we're going to go through some checklists, things that we need to check on a regular basis and make sure that we're covering. And then how are we going to handle when the playbook, we go from being, adapting a process all the way back to basic functionality. And so there's a lot to work with here. Cole, I want to stop for a minute and make sure, are there any questions that have come in so far for the presentation?
None so far in the chat, and the chat
Okay.
is available for people to kind of speak up even though they're muted, and we will see those. So
Great. Anything else we talked about on this slide, Cole, that you want to add in? Because I know we've had many conversations.
yeah, I think you about covered it. I mean, I think it's addressing where we are now, and then trying to get to that transformative stage.
Wonderful. So let's turn our attention to some of the checklist boxes that we are going through on a regular basis and that we're helping our customers go through. And I do want to start with down here in the lower right-hand corner. So much of the day can end up aligning itself with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was on a call with one of the folks that we work with this morning, and you know their situation had gone from a level of stability at 8 o'clock. By the time that I talked to, had the conversation at 9:30, that their employment or their employer had chosen to lay people off, and they were one of the folks, and so they were all the way back at the baseline here. How are we doing psychologically? What does this mean? Are we going to be able to meet our bills? What are all of the things that are going on here? How do I let my family and friends know the situation that I'm in? And so how are we going to address this moment? So just in the span of 90 minutes, what they thought the situation was completely changed. And I think there's more truth to that moment. Some customers are choosing to work week by week, and so there's only 7 days of knowledge about how far, what we know is going to happen after 7 days. And so that level of uncertainty really means that we need to check in on all of these things. And so at the highest level of our checklist, we've really identified some management activities that need to happen. So are you familiar with all of the policies and all of the responsibilities that you have, and how time off is going to be managed, and how the policies are going to be applied if you have special needs. What about after hours support all of a sudden? When does the workday begin and end? All of these things are important, and not only do we need to have this idea of the what policies we're working with, but we need to understand and probably have some conversations that we just we thought we understood and depended on in the organization. We may or may not have understood them, but in all actuality, what we are having to do now is we're having to check in with our CIO and our CISOs and our security folks to say, do we have the right or an acceptable level of security around our applications and around our data? To the teams that are supporting us throughout the organization, do they know what dates are critical for us? Do our people know how to contact them and what kind of support and turnaround they can depend on? Have the SLAs changed for our service desk as we look at all of this? Do we have a clear understanding of what work the executive level is expecting each of our teams to accomplish during this time? And I think that when we can have clarity that way, it can be communicated down to our teams. And as we begin to communicate down to that, we really do start with the people side of things, because in this moment, a lot of people get to step up, and we're accomplishing a lot of things because of success that's based on heroics. People that are embracing this moment of uncertainty, and they're still producing the value that they need to produce for an organization. And so we want to support them. And the questions that we've kind of come up with are, do people understand what they're responsible for? Do they understand the why of what they're doing? It may be exactly the same, but chances are it's focused in, and it's more limited to an essential set of business processes. And so do they understand what the scope of what they're doing? Has each team member determined how to do deep work? If your kids take a nap between 1:30 and 3:30 every afternoon, then your team needs to understand that that's probably one of your primary times to get work done. And so having meetings during that time, or a lot of interruptive conversations, or a lot of chatting, is probably not the best for you to be able to accomplish what you need to. And you as a manager need to understand that, what your team members need, and the other team needs to have that understanding of when we can get work done. We can also not feel disconnected, and as managers and as leaders in our corporations, we need to really work hard to make sure that they have the information that they need, that they feel like they're in the loop, that they don't they understand how decisions are being made, and as much as possible why decisions are being made. And we're going to spend a lot of our days coaching at that kind of emotional and physical level, like I was talking about earlier. I can guarantee that sometime in the next week, most of your team members are going to reach a breaking point, and that's okay. Or somebody in their family is going to reach a breaking point, and they're going to have to step away from their responsibilities and go deal with their graduating senior, because it's just getting to be too overwhelming for them. And that's the reality that we live in. There's also, in this last point here, we've done some talking about, and I think we may be developing another webinar about this. And this is some of the cognitive biases that we bring into this moment. We've got some star performers, but a star performer in the office, in the way that everything was set up, is not guaranteed to be a star performer in this new remote setting. They may actually be the person that doesn't have all the support and doesn't have everything, and they may need some special attention to make sure that they can step into this moment and produce the value that you're depending on them for. So we can't have that halo effect. We can't be suffering from this idea of a status quo bias, that all we're doing is setting up an office, the whole office environment remotely and in this online area. Things are going to change substantially as we look through this. We can't operate from this idea of scarcity and this zero-sum cognitive bias. There are win-wins that can be made here. If one person wins, it doesn't mean another person loses. And we have to be cognizant of those things, and we have to take those things into consideration. We have to be aware of the cognitive biases that we're working from, and maybe we can help to point out for our teams some of the cognitive biases they're bringing in, and allow them to be kind to themselves and to their families and to their coworkers, because everything is changing, and we just want people to realize where we're at. This is new territory, though, for a lot of managers. And we understand that, but there is a strong people component here. Cole, is there anything else that comes to mind for you that you want to pull out on this slide?
Not particularly. I think, taking account that halo effect that, someone who was really good at something in the office may not have the same set of skills that transfer in a remote environment is really interesting and something to consider, moving into this new environment.
Yeah, good. Overall, what we are emphasizing here is that there's a huge need to trust your employees, to trust our employees. And this may actually uncover places where you cannot trust your employees, and that will be something that hard conversations and hard actions that you have to take into consideration, and you have to grapple with, and those will take active management. But hopefully we've built the kind of teams that will do more than survive right now, that they'll actually begin to thrive and find a new way to produce things. And so we want to function on that. As we continue to build out some of our playbook and what we're working at here, we have identified some things around processes. Now, just to be clear, these processes are not the input output processes that we have, but it's how do we perform the work that we need to perform. And so how can we adapt the core processes to to the environment that we're in? The fact that somebody can get over and go scan something on the great copier that we have and send it out email to 12 people may not be the functionality that somebody has in their own in their own home. Distributing notes and reports and everything else like that may take on a complete electronic form as we go forward with this. But it's really about, as managers and leaders, honing in on giving the guidelines and the guidance and the goals, and making sure that your team's tracking on the important deadlines, and that everybody's tracking their work to that you're tracking on the operational priorities, not only you as a manager, but for your team, and that you're communicating out and up about how your team's doing, especially if you're hitting some obstacles that were unexpected and those dates are coming into question. More communication early is better. Owning the fact that there's a problem here and getting more minds on it may actually solve a problem, whereas traditionally, just because it functioned, nobody would have thought, even entertain the idea that there would be an issue with all of this. When it comes down to the bottom of this, though, as we talk about our processes, what I'm finding out, and I found out about this with my wife, she works with volunteers with an organization, and she was getting a report together, and the service that they were using to put the report out on the internet so that she could work on it at home was not working correctly at the time. And so she thought to herself, listen, I don't have time to fool with that. I've got to get this done. I've got other things to do. I'm going to upload this to my Google Docs. And inside of me, there's a little cringe going on, because all of a sudden that institutional data has gone beyond their control. Now, in this case, there wasn't anything major that was happening. This was to produce a report and to do some communication from. But those things, as a manager, you need to understand that those things are happening. People are clever, and they're dedicated to getting work done. The things that we have to watch out for and put up the guardrails for is what's acceptable and unacceptable when it comes to tools. Google just went through this. I don't know whether anybody saw the article last night, but they have put a moratorium on anybody using Zoom within Google for meetings other than for personal reasons. And so we really have to work on this. As we talk about the tools and we talk about things, the playbook that we have developed and are developing for folks really has a lot to do with understanding what are the approved tools, and then evaluating whether those approved tools actually meet the business need that you have and the operational needs that you have. And then there is, as a manager, again, you have to make sure that everybody is well versed enough in those tools so that they can function. Just because, the tool's been decided on by 90% of the organization, there may never have been a reason for your team to use it. There may be special tools that your team needs access to that they're only going to get through some kind of remote connectivity, whether it's VPN or remote gateway, RPG, or yeah. So RPG is the wrong three-letter acronym there, but the point is that they're not going to get access to the tools that they need without some special clarification and some special access. And so that's what you have to help your team manage, because otherwise they're going to feel like they are out of control, and that's when morale takes a dive. So the one question in here that we found out the hard way on, and I was actually the subject of this one, was the next to last one, is are your team members' physical home work areas actually and connectivity sufficient and dependable? We had worked for almost 2 weeks remotely, and all of a sudden last Friday afternoon, we tipped over the internet in my neighborhood and we did not have access. And so we went from high functionality, something that we thought was dependable, to everybody having to go to hotspots. And so the first thing I had to do was let everybody know, listen, this is the problem that I'm having. Here's where we're at, and I'll let you know how things come out. So some of these questions have to be asked repeatedly. For instance, if somebody says, well, all the information about Zoom possibly not being secure, we're not going to use it, that may not have trickled down to you. So you need to check in with your folks and make sure that the tools that you're using are the ones that are still appropriate for the organization. I'm sure that there may be some questions that have come in here. Cole, are there anything in the chat that we want to address now?
No, still nothing. I like this point. How are you tracking progress? Is it a status report? Is it emails back and forth? If you've got individual communications, how is everyone on the same page? And that's something that I think, unless you had a system in place before, when everybody's working from home or working from a remote environment, that's going to be a big challenge for people.
Yeah. When you put the management and the people and the process and the tools together, you really come down to ask the question of what kind of productivity improvements can we get? Because the chances of everybody having an 8-hour day right now that is contiguous and that everybody can focus and that you can have everything just go as if they were all in the same office building for the same period of time is probably not going to happen. People will have to say, how can I be more productive with my health? Now, I've promised myself for years that if I didn't have to do my commute, that I would take time to exercise. And so, I started going for a walk. My wife was talking to one of her friends, and she asked her whether she was still commuting to the office. And she said, well, I am. I go out and I take a half an hour walk and I get back to my house and then I go to work. And then I leave from my house and I go back home for lunch. And then I go back, come back to work, and then I go home for the day. And that's actually something that's helping her. I switched slides on us. That is actually something that is helping her break up her day. So there are physical ways that we can do this, but we need to practice wellness, and we need to help our folks practice wellness, because as we cope, some of the physical things that we do may actually detract. We also have the mental side of it, where we can focus on our MITs and our 80-20. We've got some habits that we can be responsible for and take control of. This is a chance to form habits and reform habits. There are also some hacks. How can we get deep work done? One of the things that we did, a hack that we did, was Cole and I have been a buddy, doing a buddy system on this presentation. And so we've been accountable to each other to make sure that this moves along in a timely fashion. So
Bert, Christy brought up, can you go into the rituals and routines a little bit?
Yeah, so the rituals and routines are great because, we all have these things where maybe on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening you started your week. You can still do that. You can make it a little bit sharper. You got the ritual for the morning. how do you start your day? How do you start your work day? How do you end your work day? All of these are routines. The good part about it may be that we get to include our families and those that we haven't gotten to spend so much time with previously in some of those routines. And we can say, hey, I'm going to be available at this time. We can invite, one of the routines can be, hey, why don't you come up and have lunch with me in my work office? And you can invite your family, your children in. There are a lot of chances to do these routines. What I would urge everybody to do is to stay as consistent with your routines as you can, and develop the ones that make sense now. So that you can continue to develop and you have that rhythm to your life. Being out of control. I mean, getting up, taking the shower, you hear this all over the internet, going into your workspace. Those are critical things. And if you're not doing those little routines, the morale and the other pieces can get out of control, and that can mean that you're needing to do it. You need to do extra work to get back on track. As managers, we can check in and make sure that we're doing it. Ask people to talk about what their routines, what they're going to focus on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are some of the other routines. I hope that's helpful. We're running just a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to keep going here, and we can entertain some more questions as we go through. What this has really come down to for us is sustaining, building trust with our teams. This is a huge moment to build trust, to set expectations and allow people to act, and to have agency in this moment and to show out their own leadership with what's going on here. It's a chance for us to be connected in a different way. It's one thing to almost put on a persona when you go to work. It's another thing to show up and understand, my daughters are really having trouble with this today, and it's affecting me. And you'll get to see into the sacred space of many people's lives. And we have to know how to comport ourselves, and we have to know how to be kind to one another. That really leads us to this idea of practicing empathy. How do we extend, maybe this will require, instead of just doing a 15-minute walk around, check in, that you have to establish a one-on-one with folks for a half an hour or an hour every week, where you can listen thoughtfully and you can have intentional actions to help them. Maybe, having pizza at their door one evening makes a world of difference, right? And it's just these acts, radical acts of intentionality and kindness, that allow people to understand that they're seen, that they're understood, and that they're not alone in all of this. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together. A lot of that speaks to the next part of it is, as managers and leaders, we have to be flexible. Not everybody's going to have the same time that they can work. We've talked about nap times and other things like that. So there's some flexibility to what the workday looks like. Doesn't mean that people don't have to show up. Doesn't mean that people don't have to produce. It just means that we're going to have to be flexible about how that happens and make sure that's going on. The last one here really talks about technology and good audio. Technology often doesn't add a whole lot, but when it diminishes in quality, when it goes away, it does create frustrations and it can detract from situations. And so that's what we're working with here. What we've been talking about internally and what we've been working with some of our customers is the fact that a lot of these things have to do with design thinking. And as we build out our playbooks for ourselves and for our customers, we really are trying to understand their situation, define what their problems are, define what critical systems in which order need to happen, come up with creative solutions through ideation, get a minimal viable product process out there for people to work on, and then test that and make it better, so that we can get people up and running as quickly as possible, or when they encounter the dysfunction and they have to conquer that dysfunction, they have the tools to go back through and iterate through this process to get better as we go forward. Before we end up today, Cole, you've put together a lot of good resources. You want to talk through some of these here?
Yeah, so here we have just some resources available on Celerity.com. I think the top three are tips and tricks for managing remote workspaces. We have our statement on the COVID-19 situation, as well as some virtual webinars that we'll be hosting here in the near future. So all of that information is available on our website. We also have some additional resources from the CDC on national statistics for the virus situation, as well as statewide information.
Yeah, and I know that we are creating more resources as we go. So continue to check back at the Celerity
Mhm.
website, because there are going to be continued opportunities for webinars, but I think several blog posts that are in the works right now that can kind of speak into this moment and help you out. Um, Before we go, I know we're right up against the 12:30, but and there's not enough time to, or we've got to have a friends meme, right? You got to have Joey and how you doing. We really want to know how are you doing, how are your people doing, how are your processes working, how are your tools working, and you and your team, what's working, what's not. Feel free to kind of open up your mics at this time if you want to. That should be control that you have, and let us know or type something in our chat.
Hello, Bert.
Hello.
Hey, this is Tim Guthrie.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, I think one of the comments you made about reaching a breaking point, part of that goes to just the social aspects or lack of social aspects of working at home. I did it for 14 months, and by the time we actually got moved to our office, I was so ready to get out of my home office I could hardly stand it. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things people are going to start. I think that's one thing that they'll start having to figure out how to deal with. So
Yeah, I know that there are some things, some apps like House Party that have been used by organizations that I'm a part of, and that we put a social hour at the end of one of our meetings this week. One of the things I'm thinking about doing next week is inviting somebody to a virtual coffee. Just reaching out to them with no other reason than to say, hey, let's just sit down and talk about how things are going. Right? There's no business here. There's nothing else. I actually last Friday I had an invite to a former employer where they invited a lot of former employees together, and we had a virtual donut hour, and we sat around for about 45 minutes, and we kind of caught up with each other, and I've been able to move forward with a couple of those relationships that folks that I'd lost track of. So you're absolutely right. Social connectedness during this time, and allowing people to brainstorm about this is incredibly important, so that you don't feel closed in. What else?
Hey, Bert, this is Sue.
Hey, Sue.
Hey, I love the checklists. I venture to say, though, if each individual in a team were to complete the checklist, you're going to get different responses. So
Yeah.
I suppose there's a way to augment getting individual where they are with the checklist so that there is an enablement to make better holistic decisions. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point. And by the way, we're going to put those checklists out as a download. That will be something that's added here. And it's not a complete checklist, right? There will be things that can be added even as time goes. But understanding that you can complete this as a team is one thing. Completing this individually is another. And that may be a really good chance for a manager or for somebody that you're kind of doing the buddy system with to understand where you're at. Questions that might not come up otherwise. And this level setting and this holistically looking at it absolutely is part of what we need to do. Good. Thanks for bringing that up. Cole, do we have anything else in the chat?
Nancy brought up a comment. If people wouldn't mind sharing what their key takeaways are from this webinar, things you saw as valuable or you can resonate with, I think that would be really helpful. Kind of in the same vein of what we're asking now, but just to push it a bit further.
Great. Anybody want to jump in?
This is Sue again. I believe for me, if the presentation as well as the checklist could be made available, I'd like to assess it more. And as I'm working with my clients, articulate some of the areas they may not be aware of, right?
Absolutely.
So for example, I'm working with a sub team with one client who kind of operate in silos, and they're of course used to being in the office. And I'm sure they're used to walking down the hall and tapping into each other for ideas that they're working on. But they may not realize that that simple thing you said was, and one of the things we ask is, where do you post the results of what you're working on? If it's on your desktop, then maybe the other three folks in your department can't really see it. They just can't come over and look over your shoulder. So how can we make it easier for them to collaborate when maybe they don't even realize there are easier ways?
Yeah. I ran into a couple team members who were trying to collaborate, and what they like to do as a part of their kind of pattern of working together was to externalize information on complex issues. So what they would do is they'd walk into a conference room with a whiteboard and they'd start scribbling everything down. They'd make sense of it, and they'd walk away. So what they ended up doing, they didn't have any whiteboards in their house. They were both living in apartments. They ended up standing, turning their cameras around on their laptops and using a mirror, because you can do a whiteboard on a mirror. I mean, there are incredibly clever people out there that are getting work done, and then they were recording that and taking pictures of it so that they had it to share with the rest of the team. And so I think that there are a lot of great ideas out there, and I'd be jealous to get my hands on some of them, because people are much more clever than I am.
And that might be something to do, because what do you do now when you're used to walking into somebody's office? What are some ideas for doing that remotely now and start capturing, those?
And there are technology tools, but as it turns out, people go to the easiest to get something done, and they get creative. Well, I don't want to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. No, I'm fine. Thank you.
And I guess, hey, this is Bud.
Yeah.
Just top 3 takeaways that I took away, great discussion, was that we've got people, processes, and tools that were working one way before this crisis hit, and now everyone is in a different state altogether, and we have to move to a new state. And there are levels of functionality that people are going to be operating at, and different companies, different individuals are at different places within that level of functionality. So one of the opportunities leaders have is to help their people, help their organizations find ways to align the people, processes, and tools so that they can honor where people are right now, but also help them grow their level of functionality. And one of the best ways to do that is to engage people and have those deep conversations, both as human beings, but also as folks who are working together on a team, so that everyone can get through this together.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the rub there can be that it seems so frenetic at some moments, right? How do you stop to have those important conversations? How do you stop and recognize somebody's leadership in a certain area in a way that you would have never imagined needed to be, there needed to have leadership occur, and in the midst of all the frenetic that's going on, and that's the the special sauce, right? If we can get all that done.
Right.
Well, thank you all for your time. We're interested in hearing more. If you'd like to reach out to me, please do. I didn't put my email up here, but info@celerity.com can get there. Please let us know if this was helpful. I'd be jealous to know if there are other topics. Like I said, we talked about doing cognitive bias and a couple of other things, but if there are topics that would be valuable to you, please let us know. And that would, so that we can, maybe speak into your need for what's going on there. Our team, is here. We're all in this together, and we're going to get through it. So thanks a lot for everything today. Look forward to talking to you all soon. Please drop me a line if it'd be helpful.
Yeah, great job, Brooke and Cole. Thank you very much.
Thank
you all very much.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.